My name is Alan Lambert. I'm the director at Merrymeeting Adult Education. I would like to personally thank you for attending tonight's Artist Talk, the second in our Fall 2022 series. We provide these talks as another way to enrich the lives of our community members. So we greatly appreciate you coming this evening and participating in the event. For tonight's talk, I would like to present Jennifer Linskey. She's a dedicated Merrymeeting art instructor and an insanely talented fine artist in her own right. Thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoy Jennifer's talk tonight. Thank you again.
So thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate it. It's sort of gray and dark out. If you do find that you need to leave a little bit early, it's absolutely fine. A couple people have told me already that they're going to be leaving a few minutes early. So I have a lot to show you. I've been teaching at Merrymeeting for about 2 years now, kind of coming up. Spring will be into my second year. And I started out obviously teaching during the pandemic. So when I started to teach, it was color theory. And I was teaching in person and using this. So I decided that for tonight's talk, I didn't want to do this. So it's so wonderful that we can all be here in person. And I've made a lot of work over the last 30 years, and I have a lot of it in my possession. So it's a really rare opportunity, I think, for you to see my work in its form, like how it's supposed to be presented. I think sometimes when we see slides, the work gets distorted in some way. I have a lot of small work, so small work projected on a large screen, it's just going to look really different. So I'm going to show you my work over the last 30 years and tell you a little bit about how I got started. So if you do have to leave, you're going to end up missing like the more current stuff. And in thinking about this talk, I actually went back into my archives and took a little journey throughout my all my folders and binders, and looked to sort of think about how I got started in this whole thing. I'm originally from Portland. Anyone here from Portland?
Originally, yeah.
Okay. I went to Lyseth Elementary School, and I had an art teacher that really nurtured students, Miss Rossi. And we would have art shows every year, and I would help her out with art shows. We also had book reports. This was back during the age when kids were reading books and doing book reports on their books. So I have a couple of very early drawings. Apparently I loved to draw when I was like 4, 5, 6, but during these projects, these book reports, I really went overboard. So this was a book cover. We would have different possibilities of things that we could potentially do, like a diorama or a book cover, or we could present something to the class, but they were always very creative projects. And I really have to thank my elementary school for kind of inspiring me to think about this. And I read Paddington Bear, so I would typically choose something that was visual. I wouldn't pick the diorama. I would pick something where I could do something two-dimensional. So this is sort of the beginnings for me. So this is a book cover. I'll pass it around. Paddington Bear. I read the book. And I think there was some sort of component where we had to briefly present it. Like say what we had read, a little summary.
Now what grade was this?
I was maybe in 3rd, 4th grade. Really pretty young.
Yeah.
And the lady living next door to me growing up, she was a 1st grade teacher, and she would tell my mother, is Jennifer available? I think I need to have some bulletin boards drawn. So for many years, I was drawing my next door neighbor's bulletin boards. She taught at Nathan Clifford's school in Portland. I'll tell you her name if you, and she would have me draw whatever was in vogue so that the students would put stuff up on the back bulletin board with the Smurfs one year. It was Pooh another year. So I was drawing freehand on all of the walls and going into her classroom for like a good week before classes started, doing all these drawings. So, I loved biology. I remember we dissected a cow's eye, and I just thought that was so great. I don't know why I thought it was great, it was completely disgusting. But I ended up bringing home the vitreous humor. And my mother was like, why did you bring this? It was fascinating to me. So this was one of my drawings. Excellent, right? I definitely, yeah. And then, I don't even remember drawing this one, but I came across it in my archives and I thought, wow, biology. This is sort of a harbinger of things to come in my life. It's the life cycle of a salmon, and I would draw freehand. And I typically would be the one that would draw everyone's figures. They would pass the drawing to me, and I would draw on 8 people's drawings or 10 people's drawings. So there was a little bit of pressure, you know? And I don't remember doing this one either, but you could see I was definitely inclined toward drawing. So when I was in high school, I'll be brief about my early experiences. When I was in high school, I didn't take any art. None. And I did band the entire time, music. And I really see a lot of parallels between music and art, actually. Chords and how you practice and how you're stretching your mind to think creatively. But I didn't do any art except doing latch hooks and things in my spare time. I didn't do anything at Deering High School until one year, like one term, I guess, I decided that I would go up into the art room and make things, and it just wasn't that interesting. But I did, in high school, get a job working for Paul's Food Centers. If anyone grew up in Portland, yeah? So there were a couple of different Paul's Food Centers, and they had these large, like 59 cents for meat, 39 cents for bananas, you know, and I was the one that would draw all of the very large drawings for the front of the store. And I would sit in my bedroom in the basement till 1, 2 in the morning. I also was a night owl. And I would put the big butcher pieces of paper on the floor, and I would do my lettering, just freehand. $20 an hour when I was in high school. It was great. Wow. And then I would go downtown and I would see my lettering projects in the store windows. So it was felt kind of good. Yeah. So still not much art. I went to Smith College, and here's where the biology comes into play. I thought I was going to be pre-med and going to take a lot of science classes, which I did. My sophomore year, I decided that I wanted to take drawing because I had missed it. So I couldn't get in. I took this very strange class my freshman year called Design in an Electronic Environment, and it was taught by a man named Gary. So my first introduction to Gary Neiswanger was in this 8 a.m. Design in Electronic Environment class. And if anyone knows anything about me, that is not a good fit. I'm a night owl, and I just don't care that much about computers. So design in an electronic environment, this is back in the late 80s. So it was very pixelated. It was signs and signifiers, and it didn't really feel like it had much to do with art. So so sophomore year, I took a drawing class at Amherst College, and I took an hour-long bus ride one way to study with a guy who had just graduated from Yale, Charlie Kamlisher, and he turned me back onto drawing again. So Gary comes into the picture a little bit later on, when after Smith, I go out and I go landscape painting with Gary. And I really get to know him. And I go over to his house, and we make pasta, and go on these wonderful painting excursions all day long. The whole day, we just get in the back of his pickup truck, We bring all of our painting gear, and we go to places like Tony Lake's. Tony Lake, he was in the Reagan administration, I think. Don't quote me. But he was political. And so we went to Tony Lake's house, and I painted Tony Lake's tractor. And there was a maple syrup house, and we would go down to the maple syrup house because we were painting year-round. This is in Western Massachusetts. We're in Maine, right? So we know that year-round means you're cold. I had a pair of hiking boots that I put on, and we would be doing jumping jacks to stay warm to landscape paint. It was crazy. But Gary really turned me on to landscape painting in a really visceral, let's get out there and do this kind of way. We never, like, we'd call each other up, we'd all get in the pickup truck, we'd be gone for the day, we'd have some sort of lunch. If somebody didn't bring their painting materials, well, Gary would let us use his paints. And I remember one time thinking, maybe I'll just not bring my paint because his is much better than mine. He had this beautiful paint called David Davis paint. It was hand ground with just a little bit of linseed oil in it, so no filler. It was almost pure pigment, and it was like marshmallow cream. It was incredible. So Gary turned me on to like good materials and how important it is to use good materials in your work. So the person that I ended up studying with after Charlie at Amherst, I kind of got into this rhythm of taking art classes more than science, and eventually decided I'm going to switch paths. So Martha Armstrong was my first painting teacher, and I've studied with several different people, and they've all offered me very different things. So Martha's work is very abstract, very shape-based, very interested in color. And over the years, I've stayed in contact with Martha. She went to Smith, just like I did, and she has been so encouraging. In fact, I keep binders of postcards that people have sent me over the years, painters, artists, talking about their shows, and I have postcard after postcard from Martha. And that's one of the reasons that I started to think about how to orchestrate this talk, because when I would look at the backs of the postcards, there would be things like, "Dear Jen, great to hear from you. Best wishes with your move. Love, Martha." I've moved a lot. So in these binders, that's a common theme. Always telling me what she's doing, always encouraging me. And if you have people in your life that value art, it's really important. So she was probably my biggest mentor, my biggest fan. I'm always calling her and saying, "Martha, write me a recommendation," and she'll do it. So this is Martha. I'll pass these around. And last year, for the first time, I got to go to Martha's place in Vermont. She has this beautiful studio in Vermont. So I got to meet her husband, who she's painted. Another person I studied with very briefly was John Gibson, and he painted balls. He went to Yale. There's a really strong tradition of painters coming from Yale. So this is John Gibson. He did some etchings, but mostly these really large ball paintings. This is kind of not typical for him because in other pieces he has balls stacked on top of each other, and they're pool balls. But he's doing them from imagination. So Martha works on site, as did Gary. Martha and Gary both go out into the landscape and paint. John Gibson is working more from memory, but they feel real. So there would be a pyramidal stack of balls that definitely could not be stacked. They'd tumble, and he wants it to feel like that could be a possibility. So in contrast, John, you get a sense of his character in the back. "Sure, I'd love to visit. as long as you'll put in a good word for me. What do I send to who? When? Sounds like you're doing great, but what is the name of this school? John. So it's fun to read different things. And this was John writing me a reference for graduate school. So in graduate school, I went and studied with a painter named Martha, sorry, not Martha, Erin, who also was coming out of that tradition from Yale. But after Smith, I went to Japan with a friend of mine. This is a print from Hiroshige. And in between Smith and graduate school, I worked at the Victoria Mansion in downtown Portland. I started out as a guide there, and here's me pointing to something. It was really fun to work there. Have people been to the Victoria Mansion? If you haven't gone, go. It's better and better and better. When I was there, they had some plaster. They were working on a lot of projects. So I was there when the architecture place was at the very top of the driveway, and now it's been turned into a gift shop. So Victoria Mansion, go at Christmas time, but actually go during the year too, because you don't get to see the work as much. It's a time capsule of Victorian architecture. And when I was working there, they had just gotten, they had over 90% of their original furnishings. And I think now it's even more.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Before you move on too far.
Sure.
Did you ever run across Katie Schneider?
Oh, yeah, she was at Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bought a painting of hers. Well, I didn't know, but then I found out that she teaches there.
That's
Yeah.
a great choice. I
Yeah.
love her work. I love, he's talking about Katie Schneider. She went to Yale and then she taught at Smith. And she was teaching at Smith when I was there.
Uh-huh.
She tended to make very small paintings. In the faculty show, she would have, I remember one of her images was of her dog. Really small painting. And then she went on to have several children, and her children appear in her work. So there's this sort of, she's trying to paint through having lots of children, and there's lots of stuff happening in her work, like kids and bathtubs and stuff. So when I went to graduate school, I studied with Aaron Palmer, and as I was saying, very different types of painters. Aaron's work is very gray, very subtle. This is one of her paintings. She does a lot of self-portraits. She has a tub here, a washing tub, and she's looking in the mirror. This is another one. Typically she paints portraits of herself, self-portraits, and then things in jars was another. So this is some sort of fish in a jar.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you're talking about John and you said he painted balls,
Yeah.
so how did he come to paint balls? Did he ever talk about it?
We used to tease him. We used to tease him a lot,
Yeah.
actually. Because when I was taking printmaking at Smith, he was wanting to learn how to etch because he wanted to segue from painting into etching and printmaking. And we'd say, John, why do you paint balls? Why do you paint? And we didn't realize that he really had painted balls for a very long time. So he painted at RISD, and then he went to Yale, and he kept painting balls, kept painting them. We never saw any figures.
Yeah.
We teased him about that. He was very good-natured about it, but I don't know,
I just think it's really interesting to wonder about those things.
he said that he liked to make you believe that it could structurally not topple, but I don't know. We really did tease him, I have to say. So this is Aaron's paintings. And every year in graduate school, I did something called a mini print. And the mini print was a moneymaker for the art department, so we could have supplies. And this is Erin's mini print. It's an etching that she did, and it really shows you how tonal her work is. So in etching, you take a copper plate, and then you make little marks on it, and you have to put it in acid to etch it. You have to get the copper to be in the acid so that the marks will get carved away. Okay? So the copper plate is this size, and then anytime she has a tone, she's taking a rag, sometimes when she's using her ink and taking the copper plate and putting a black ink on top of it, and then taking the ink off. So with an etching, your plate is going to print differently each time. So some types of printmaking, you'll get the same result every time you print it. Like other types of printing, you'll have your touch matters. So Erin did this for the mini print, which is a big job because we had to do 65 mini prints that looked relatively the same. So we did this every year. This is Erin's.
Can you
My
say
teacher.
more about, you said it makes money for the school?
Yeah, it was, I went to SIU for graduate school, and I went there because Erin was teaching there. I really wanted to go to a place where I would feel safe to paint landscape. And Erin had just come from Yale, and she'd studied with William Bailey and Bernard Chait, and I think she was one of their, I think she was a teaching assistant for a time when she was at Yale. So she participated as a faculty member in this mini print, but it was mostly graduate students and then a few faculty that would do this mini print, and I did it every single year. So when I was in graduate school, I did quite a bit of printmaking, and just give you an example of what a copper plate, like Erin would have used, looked like. So this is a dry point that I did, copper plate, and I took a Dremel tool, which you have to plug in, and it goes zzz, and it creates a burr on the surface. So anytime the burr is raised up, it will print. So some types of printmaking, the inside prints, and the top surface prints. For dry point, the top, the burr, will print, and it will catch the ink. This type of printmaking, you can only get 4 or 5 prints, and then the plate starts to not have a burr on it anymore. So this is an example of a copper plate. Copper over time will react to the acids in your hands and to the environment, so that's why it looks a little tarnished. So I would just have to take a cleaner and clean it off. But you can see, you can touch it with the sides of your hands if you want. And this is a print that results from that particular copper plate. My print is kind of banged up, but you can see a lot of different textures. This is an AP, A/P. I did it in 1996. So at the bottom of your print, you typically have quite a lot that you're saying what year. AP means artist proof. This means that I'm not sure if I like it yet, and I'm trying to decide how I want to put my ink down on the page. And it's the number 1. So a lot of printmaking in graduate school. And not typical for me at all, but SIU Carbondale had a lot of different programs. They had metal smithing, they had a glass blowing studio, which was amazing. The glass blowing studio had to be round the clock, and it was very collaborative. You had one person that was blowing the glass and one person that was holding and turning it. We had a place called Pulliam where people were doing all sorts of ironwork, and it had so many different programs. Photography, cinema. So one semester I decided to take bookmaking. So I made, this is one of many books I made, but this is the only one that I could find to show you. I took bookmaking and I made this, and I just was playing with this idea of landscape and sewing and printmaking, photography. we had to do a lot of art theory and things, and this was sort of a project that I had done for a more modern class, but it's so not typical of my work that I thought I would bring it in just to show you. This is I made this whole thing, and then this is gesso where I did a drawing on top of it. So I was thinking, it's a very contemporary thing for me to do. It's so unusual, but it was fun. So this was when I was thinking a lot about houses and home. So house and us and house. And then at the very end of this, you can see that there's several more pages. This is a woodcut that I did, that I put in here on tracing paper. And then home, like me. Oh. So there's a man named Joel Feldman that I did printmaking with at SIU, and unlike the dry point and the etching, this is called relief printmaking. So I took a wood block and I literally drew right on the block. I went out into the landscape and I drew on the block. I went back into my apartment and I would carve for days. And I had friends in grad school that would say, like, you know, like, what are you doing? Like, it's so meditative to carve wood. You can see that block. Some types of printmaking, the block will go away. You'll carve and do a color, add another color, add another color, and you'll have no block at the end of the process. Mine is just a straightforward black and white image. And this is what the print looked like. I was playing with the placement of the print on the page. Keep in mind I had gone to Japan and visited my friend, and I was really interested in papers, and typically you'll print on a rice paper. This is sort of, so I have a few prints over here. Some of them are banged up, but they give you the idea.
How do you know to save everything?
What's that?
How do you know to save everything?
It's been hard during the moves. It's been really hard. I have very few drawings from undergrad. I rented a place right after Smith for a year and a half maybe. And I went to Malaysia and I came back and my drawings were stored in the basement. They were figure drawings. I had been part of this group where I went to a figure drawing class once a week, and there were professors there. It was really fun. I was invited to this really great, it was in the back of one of a professor's studio. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was thinking of something. What were you asking?
Well, I said, how did you decide to save all your work?
So I came back from Malaysia. And when I came back from Malaysia, I went to the basement of where I had been renting because all my drawings were stored there. And these drawings from figure drawing that I'd gone to were in the basement. There had been some flooding. So, and I brought all my drawings out. I vividly remember being like, oh. And I tried to save them, but they started to get mold on them. So, yeah. So I have very few figure drawings from that time, but lots of good memories, because it was a really cool experience. The guy whose studio I was in, he made little maquettes, little tiny sculptures, and they were all around his studio. And he was waiting for the money so that he could cast them in bronze. And they were really dynamic. They were like all around us. So it was really fun. This is, I think, some sort of Japanese temple that I had gone to, so I was maybe working from a photograph to get my image from this one. But mostly I was going out into the landscape and drawing directly on the block.
Can you say more about when you said, like, you're on the block and then there's no block or something, I didn't quite
Oh.
follow that.
Yeah, so I will typically, it's easier to show you on this one.
It's a piece of pine, is it?
Yeah, so what I would do is I would put white gesso over the whole board, and then I would use black permanent marker and go into the landscape. And that way I knew the black permanent marker areas were not going to get carved, and the areas that were in recess, the areas that I did carve, were not going to print. So the top surface of a print. And if I wanted to make this be more colors, I would print it once in the black, or whatever color I want. And if you print it over and over and over again, you want to think about what those subsequent colors are going to do to your image. So people will typically print a lighter color, like let's say yellow. So they go yellow. And then they carve some more. And they print it again, but they print it the second time in blue. Well, some areas are going to stay yellow, some are going to be blue, and then when they overlap, they could get green. So they'll think ahead of time what that will do. But when you carve that way, you have two choices. You can either keep carving the block until it's nothing. So every single time you print with a new color, it's nothing. Or you can have, let's give the same example. You could have 3 blocks. One block is your yellow block, one block is your blue block, and then the same image, the third block, you have your yellow plus blue is green. But you could have 10 blocks, different colors. It can get really
You have
complicated.
to carve each one though, right?
You have to carve each one.
Wow.
So printmaking is very labor intensive. This probably took me a week to carve,
Oh, I would think so.
right?
Yeah.
So if I wanted to do this in multiple colors, I don't want to lose my block, because that means you have to print, like let's say you want to eventually have 50 of these. You're going to make a few mistakes because you might not register it properly. The print might be too light. So if you do a color, if you have lots and lots of blocks, if you have where you're carving and carving and carving, you have to make sure that you have 50 pieces of paper, and maybe you'll get 42, and by the time you've finished carving, there's nothing on this surface. Or the other option is you have lots and lots of blocks, and you have to keep registering it. You have to keep putting it down in the same spot over and over again. Yellow block, ink up the next one,
Now-
blue block,
Now, having
register
done
it.
this, what prints is what you didn't carve? I mean, what you carved doesn't print, right?
What you carve doesn't print.
Right.
So relief printmaking, there's different types of printmaking. So there's relief. So relief is like a stamp. Anything that you ink is going to print, the top surface. So the roller goes over the surface, and then you flip it over onto your paper. I like to do it like this actually, where you have the block underneath and the paper on top. And what's really wonderful is that the rice paper is so thin that you can literally see the ink transferring when you apply pressure. You want to use a wooden spoon, you don't want to use something silver, because then you'll get a silver tarnishy look to it. But the print will start to emerge, and you'll know how dark it is with the thin rice paper. I did a few more prints in grad school. I was into this house thing, house series stuff.
How do you get the middle tone?
You can ink the block different ways. Like German expressionist printmakers like Munch, he would ink it differently. And you can, here's the other thing. I could print this by painting it, right? So I could get two colors by just inking over my grass in one color and my sky in another. So I can ink it up differently to give me a different result. The monk did that a lot. So printmaking is super exciting. I teach printmaking in January.
Oh.
It's really, it's fun. It's super experimental in terms of what you can get. And this is another one. So I was thinking shapes in dark to light. So you have to think about where your dark areas and where your lighter areas are. So.
How many weeks is your print making?
6 or 8 maybe? We're gonna do some monotypes, some collagraphs. And if people want to do some carving, we're gonna do that too. So this is graduate school. I did a lot of postcard size paintings, black and white. And I thought it was interesting to bring these to show you how I frame things and how I edge things. So these were meant to go up on the wall like little postcards. These were graduate school. Little black and white paintings. I did a lot of these. I put quite a few of these in my graduate thesis show. They were just everywhere. So I was going really large or really small.
And what made you go with black and white?
I wanted to think more tonally in my work. So I do a black and white of something, and then sometimes I do a color. So this was my bathtub in my apartment in graduate school. I had this crazy Pepto-Bismol pink bathtub, which was fabulous. So it's...
Is that paint on canvas, or what is this material?
So, what are these?
Yeah.
So I painted on a lot of different surfaces, and I wanted to show you that too, because I've changed things up quite a lot over the last 30 years. These are on masonite, and we had a woodworking shop, and I used to cut them down myself in graduate school. So they're on masonite board, which is like pressed hardboard.
So it was a quarter-inch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another sort of fundamental question.
Yep.
This form of printmaking on this material, this copper, now this prints what you carve, right? This appeared to be that this prints what you scratch in there. In other words, this is scratched and you get a dark.
Right.
So this prints
Right.
what you ink.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're in dry point. This is called a dry point. In dry point, you're creating a burr. So the burr raises up on the surface, so
I
it's the
see.
raised
I see.
surface.
I see.
Yeah. So some more little black and white ones. Or black and white. There was a little post office in Makanda. This is Makanda, Illinois, that I used to like to go to. So these are on location. I would sometimes sit in my car and paint, sometimes be outside, depending on the weather. And I was painting them with a sort of gray, neutral edge.
And then what do you put on the back?
What's that?
What do you put on the back?
I just did like,
Okay, just
Yeah.
put it on, yeah.
so I was just interested in shapes, and a lot of my paintings at this point in time have very clear shapes, like a trapezoid roof,
Oh.
color. So I'm really thinking about shape, color, some of the things that Martha was thinking about, but in a really pretty different way. So that's chapter 1. After graduate school, I thought I was going to live in Scotland. I got a job at a museum in Scotland. And I ended up not taking it. But I went there for 3 weeks. And I stayed in this castle in Scotland. It was in Arbroath, which is about an hour from Dundee. And my thought was that if I was there as a resident archiving their museum collection, that I would have this launching pad to go and travel all over Europe. Well, I went there, and it didn't feel like a good fit. So I enjoyed my time. This is the castle that I went to. And it was in the middle of, there's nothing around. And I think it was actually a way station for pilgrims that had contracted, that were being bled. It had a very strange feel when you were in the castle alone. And my job would have been to stay in this very isolated castle for a year in the winter. And I thought, no, that's not for me. But I made a painting of it when I was there. I made several. I made one of the exterior, this one, and then I made one of the hallway too. But this, it sort of shows that I was documenting things that were happening in my life. So instead of going to Scotland, I moved to Colorado.
Of course.
So Colorado's very different in palette, very, very different. And big open skies, right? Anyone been to Colorado before?
Where did you live?
I lived in Loveland the first year, and I made sure to send everybody Valentines. Because when you live in Loveland, they postmark your Valentine saying Loveland, Colorado. Kind of cute.
I live in Loveland, Ohio.
I lived in Colorado Springs for a few years too.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We were in Loveland for 1 year, and then Fort Collins the last several years that we were there. And I was teaching. I was teaching at rec centers. I was teaching at Front Range Community College. They have locations in Westminster, Remington, Preston Junior High School. So I was teaching all throughout my time in Colorado. This was an area not too far from where I lived, and I was standing, looking down and over, and this is almost Wyoming. You can just see so far, and I hadn't been used to that because in New England, everything feels really close. And then in graduate school, the skies were not like this at all. The skies in graduate school were this very cerulean blue, like a yellowy blue all the time. So I really appreciate our home state here because the skies are fantastic in Maine. So this is an example of one of the paintings I did in Colorado. Again on Masonite.
Oh.
And this is where I lived. The front, our little house that we planted roses in front. I didn't even, I brought in raw artwork too to show you.
Okay.
So I'd probably strip frame this. And this was also very close to where I lived, a place called Horsetooth Reservoir. So there's a reservoir really low behind here.
Pretty wild frame you got there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I love painting the frames in colors that were kind of, yeah. So this painting was my first painting that got into a big show. So it's pretty special painting to me. And my daughter actually helped me frame it at the kitchen table. And it went off to a show in New York City called the Bowery Gallery. And Lois Dodd, who, if any of you live around here, you would know Lois Dodd is a landscape painter. She has a piece in the Bowdoin College Art Museum right now. She's fabulous. Well, she juried this little painting into the show at the Bowery Gallery. So my daughter helped me frame it at our kitchen table, and then about a month later, we went to New York City to see the show. My daughter said, "That's your painting." So it was kind of a nice, hold the edges of it. But I was really interested in the rock formations and how they're orange and changing. And in Colorado, I was also doing some still lifes in my studio when I wasn't teaching. A friend in graduate school had made this bowl, and I set up a tapestry behind it. So. When we moved to California, my daughter was little, and I didn't have a lot of time to paint, and Wolf Kahn was somebody that we talked about a couple weeks ago in 10 by 10 class that I teach. And Wolf Kahn was saying that when his daughters were young, he painted small. And I did too. So when my daughter was taking a nap, which seemed to be not very often, she was one of those kids that would, sometimes she would take a nap in the afternoon, sometimes not at all. I set up my easel on our balcony. We had a little balcony, and I would paint off the balcony. So in this painting, I'm sitting on a balcony looking down and across at what was, here was a parking lot where we parked our car, and then over here is some vegetation. So I was just painting whenever I possibly could.
Did your daughter paint?
I would sit her on the floor when I was making dinner, and I would put watercolor paper down, and she would do watercolor, and then she'd say, I'm done. And then she wanted the next piece, the next piece. But I've saved some of her watercolors, and their kids' art is unbelievable. So, we had a friend that would occasionally watch my daughter, and this is a view from her place, which was overlooking Mount Tamalpais, Mount Tam. That's Mount Tam in the background. And this is a similar view to this one. So parking lot, looking across, there was this pink pole, and pink and green are sort of pink and green or red and green are complementary colors. So I was sort of thinking a little bit about color theory in this one. A lot of vegetation, a lot happening in this painting.
Yeah.
So that's Colorado and California. Anyone have any questions so far?
Do you have a house that's big to store all your art?
Right? I know. It gets challenging. So this is the next chapter.
How many chapters?
I have 2 more chapters. So we moved from California to Evanston, Illinois. We lived fairly close to Northwestern, and I worked at the Trader Joe's in Glenview, Illinois. And we have one Trader Joe's, but in Chicago, they were everywhere. So I started out as a basic crew person, and one day they realized that I had an art background. So I was making, these are the aisle, like they divide the promotional things. So they were doing a fall campaign, and so they replicated these about 50 times and put them all throughout the store. And they would give me more and more art projects. So I basically started working for the art department. And I would make these quirky little descriptions for their products, and I had quite a lot of fun with that. So there's my lettering from way back in high school, and I made these little gingerbread men. But it was art with a deadline.
Yeah.
We were like turning it
Did
around.
they get put out all over Trader Joe's, all over the country, or just that one?
Just the
store?
one. Everything was all hand drawn.
Wow.
Everything. So I would do the chalkboards. I would do this. These went by the register for the chocolate bars and stuff.
Oh.
In my review, saying I was doing a good job. wild rice and the floating gourds and pumpkins. And I never thought I would do that job. It was fun though, it was really, really fun. So if you do art, I would highly encourage you to keep a book of all of your different things that you've entered. This is my book that I keep, anytime I have a show that I get into, I keep the congratulations you got in. So we're living in Evanston, and we bought our first house. So this is the front yard. It was a little it wasn't even on the registry. It predated being in the actual, yeah. But it was a little Luxembourg-style farmhouse. And this was the front. And it had a little garden out back. And if you went through, this is the garden. If you went through the garden, my studio was right back here. And at that time, I was not only working at Trader Joe's, but I think I was also simultaneously teaching young kids art. So my daughter and some of her friends were coming over, and I was doing art classes, but for money. So they had little art shows. In the backyard, we had a bonfire, and when we had an art show, we put little red dots on their work, and it was really fun. So this is the backyard, and this was my studio right here. So in Chicago, I started thinking more about how dense and urban it was, and a lot about wires and roof lines. So this is my studio, top of it, and there's snow on the top. And I'm painting on canvas here. So notice that there's a different material. This was the inside of our place. We have one of those Herman Mueller lamps that I just loved, so I wanted to paint the inside of the space. And this was a painting that was right above my kitchen sink. It's a really large painting for me, actually. It's like about this big, and I painted it in detail because I just liked the space. But it had that orange backdrop. So.
Can I ask a question right out of the blue?
Sure.
What really impresses me is how autobiographical, honest, memoirish. Did you ever try to brand yourself to be a name? I mean, that's what I respect.
Not at all.
I mean, that seems like such in order to sort of sell, you have to do that.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I was in graduate
I mean, was that
school.
an issue? I mean, among your colleagues and friends? I mean, how
Yeah.
do
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I was in graduate school, I was selling my work pretty regularly, and I sold a couple of those little postcard paintings to professors. Aaron bought one of my paintings, and Joel, the printmaking guy, supposedly bought one for a friend that was about this size, and I found that he kept it. And it was really touching but then I started I just moved around so much that every time I got my footing and found places that I wanted to show, I was moving again. But it's definitely, I've never commercialized at all. In fact, when I
don't really exactly mean commercialized. I mean, I don't know what I mean, except that I know some really good painters who seem to me to deserve more from the bigger galleries. I don't know, but I don't know. I'm not really a professional painter, but it seems to me an issue that only a very few people get recognized.
Right. Yeah, I've never, when I say commercial, I mean, I've never even thought to well, I thought about it, but I haven't done it. I thought about having maybe 6 of these flower paintings, smaller, and putting them on cards and selling them. And I haven't, I just, I don't know. And I've given paintings away.
No, it's refreshing to hear somebody who's free of that, or appears to be free of
Yeah.
that compulsion.
I did have, when I was doing my figure drawing group, we had a group show, and there was someone from the Springfield Museum of Art that called me, and I thought for sure it was like a wrong number. Why would they be calling me? You know? And they were interested in meeting with me, and I just didn't feel like I was ready. I was just too, I didn't. So. These are from the back of my house. So in the winter in Chicago, I was painting and like looking out the window, and we were sort of raised up, 2nd floor. So I was looking across at 2nd story buildings, and that's a little piece of my studio roof line right there. I just love those triangle shapes. It's like rectangle shapes in a square and rectangles. And this one with all the wires, just wires everywhere.
Go to India.
Oh, right?
Hundreds of wires instead of just one. All over the paper.
And these are also Chicago. Again, a little bigger for me. This is my studio. It had, these are windows to my studio. Wires, flag poles, all sorts of things sticking up. And this is our neighbor's backyard. So you have all these divided up spaces.
Are you looking out a window there? So
Yeah.
that the interior is on the left-hand panel there?
Yeah. I just was fascinated by how divided up everything was. There were backyards, like this is my neighbor's barbecue grill, but it was, even the barbecue grill was enclosed within the yard, within the fences everywhere. And these are oil paintings. So everything I've been showing you up until now is oil. I learned in oil from Martha as a student, and I just continued to paint in oil. I didn't really even question it at all. I just kept working in oil. Anyone recognize this? If you've been to Chicago, this is the L train. The L, we could hear it from our house. It was about a block and a half away. It was the Davis, no, it wasn't the Davis. It was the next stop after Davis. But I was interested in this green, and again, all these forms and signs and just a lot. And winter in Chicago. This is our side yard. So I'm again looking out a window and looking down onto the bird bath.
I love your shadows.
Thank you. So a little bit of that warm cool, like yellow and violet.
If these are all oils, the oils I used to are much more shiny. How come they're so matte?
Yeah, I love a matte surface. I've put varnish on a few paintings, and I want a really matte surface.
So the stuff I've seen has varnish on it, and that's why it's shiny?
Sometimes people will use Damar varnish in their mixture of media. It could be that. Yeah, I just use straight paint. I don't use any medium. When I was doing oil, I was just using oil paint and a little bit of herbs to clean my brushes. This is near where my daughter went to school. So again, like the diamond, the shape,
Yeah.
windows, and the wacky colored yellow frame.
I love it. Can you pass that one around?
Sure. This one got a little bit, I have to repaint the yellow, I repaint the yellow here and it got a little bit banged up.
And so what years are these from?
So this one, probably about 2010. And I did a lot of this 9 by 12, either 9 by 12 horizontally or 9 by 12 vertically. So I think this is a 9 by 12 vertically.
Yeah.
I just wanted to keep with the same shape. Artists will sometimes do that. They'll keep with a familiar shape to give the work a cohesiveness. And because your arm starts to get to know that shape and how what will fit in it. Yeah.
What's the name again of the teacher you referred to earlier, Martha
Armstrong?
Armstrong?
Yeah.
So you're much influenced by her? Did you say?
I think sometimes I am. It's interesting because I definitely think about shape and color and space and what the space is doing. I think each of the people that I've studied with, they've definitely offered me a lot of different things. When I studied with Erin, she was a really great teacher. So that's Evanston.
What precipitated all these moves?
Usually jobs. Yeah, not mine, but my husband's. Yeah. And it's interesting because I grew up in the same house my entire childhood until I went off to Smith. Same house, like never moved. And then when I went to Smith, I counted at one point, I wanted to move around when I was at Smith because I thought, okay, you're still within the confines of the same campus, why not just bounce around and live in a different house? They had a house system, and some of the houses had a different feel to them. So I lived in Gillette House for 2 years, and I moved to the Quad, and then I moved again, but I had no idea that was gonna kind of continue throughout my whole life. So I'm a very good mover, very, very good mover.
Where do you live in Portland?
I live in North Deering, Summit Street.
Yeah. My family lived there.
No kidding, on Summit Street?
Yes. Silverman?
Really?
Yeah.
Louis Silverman.
Milty Silverman and Harry Rogers. The Rogers family?
That's really familiar.
My family was Century Tire.
Oh, okay, it's I'm gonna have to, yeah, I'll
I went to Daring.
class of 1988, yeah.
Oh.
Not 80. About 70.
So, this is the painting that is on the announcement for the series, the talks. And I thought it would be interesting just to show you the painting to see, it's different when you see it in person, right? I've now segued from painting in oil to, I paint in acrylic at this point, and I still do. So you can take a look at how different the oil paint application is and the acrylic. And I want it to still be matte, like we were talking about it, some surfaces being shiny and some being matte. I want my surface to feel similar to my oil painting surface.
Why'd you change to acrylic?
I just felt it might be a little healthier,
Oh, okay.
but I think I'm gonna go back to oils. Yeah.
How do you get your acrylics to be matte then?
I don't use anything else with it, just straight acrylic and water.
Because I thought they tend to be shiny a little bit, you know.
Yeah, so oil paints and acrylic paints have very different properties. Some people will not paint in acrylic because it has sort of a plasticky feel in general, and it's hard to create depth because with an oil painting, you build the surface, you build and you layer it. And oil paint is from the earth, so your pigments get richer and stronger with time and deepen. But yeah, I've painted in both, and some people will say, oh, oil painting is harder or acrylic is harder. They're just really different. They're not like one isn't easier or harder than the other in my opinion. They have properties that you want to capitalize on. And I think I'm ready to maybe paint in oil again, we'll see. But this is called Dockside, and I was going down to Wiscasset and painting before I worked at a museum. So I needed to not get messy and dirty before work.
Yeah.
So acrylic has an easy cleanup. You just clean up with water. So it was a good situation for me. So you can hold the edges of it. How are we doing? Everyone doing okay? So I had to try making a painting of a lighthouse, right? Because I'm a Maine painter. I grew up in Portland. I've got to try that. So this is Portland Headlight. Edward Hopper painted Portland Headlight. It's a complete icon. I typically don't paint things that are like so.
Well, no.
Yeah, I just wanted to give it a go. And I was with my daughter, so we were painting in front of it, like kind of off to the side, so all the tourists weren't on the path. There's a little bench that we were working at. So I never painted it before, and it's a place that I have always gone to. So, actually, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow used to walk to Portland Headlight for inspiration. You walk across the bridge. This is a place in Mid-Coast, Maine called Giant Stairs.
Oh, yeah.
It's a wonderful place to paint. You have to clamber down the rocks, and you can get really low so people passing by don't see you. I'm kind of a stealthy landscape painter. I've had situations where I've looked behind me and a tour bus has gotten off and they're all, I feel those eyes on me, and I've turned around and I'm like, wait a minute, a whole bus of people are watching me paint. If you are at Giant Stairs, you are in bliss, because you can get really down in those little rocks, and then the vista is off to sea. So I'm looking at these rocks that have this really strong direction. Canvas again, but acrylic. Oh, this is also Portland Headlight area, by the way.
That's Portland Headlight?
Yeah, it's closer to, it's down where the parking lot is,
Hmm.
and where there used to be a building over here.
Maybe I missed something, but you mentioned acrylics. How you moved from oils to acrylics? Could you say a little bit more about that, or how?
Yeah, I started working at a museum, and in order to paint before I went into work, I had to wear a dress and oil painting. I didn't want to be too messy, and the cleanup is much easier with acrylic paint, just water. So I was painting before work. So.
But you have the same, I guess I feel oil has more, I don't know, nuance to it. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I still have my old oil paints, and if you've painted in oil, your paints will last a long, long time. Eventually they'll stiffen up. The tubes will get really, really hard and you can't use them, but that takes decades. I've thought about and probably will go back to at least partially painting in oil again. So I have a few spots in the area that I like to go and paint at. And I'll typically go to a spot and paint it once, paint it again, paint it from a slightly different time of day, different viewpoint, and really get to know a spot. It's really important to me to paint in this way. I just feel like I get to understand the place so much better. So this is a place that I would go to. It was fairly close to where we lived in Brunswick. My daughter was going to Brunswick High School, and right at the end of the street is Wharton Point. It's where all the clammers go, and it's a beautiful, beautiful spot to paint. So I was looking out, and there's some islands. I painted this multiple times. Masonite, and then here is the opposite direction. And there were some beach roses, and I was interested in the idea of both looking out to sea, and then also something that kind of made you have to go over it to then look out.
It seems like there was a big shift that we didn't really talk about with your art. It seemed like you went to houses, and then all of a sudden, there's boats.
Right?
You know, so what happened there?
That's interesting. So I was painting a lot of houses in Chicago, and even when I was in graduate school, and then when I moved to Maine, I went pure landscape. Like houses just started to disappear. I do have a few. Where I
Aren't many boat options in Chicago.
right?
Or Colorado.
So this is a little view of downtown Wiscasset. This was on, I painted really small for a while when I was first starting in acrylics, just to kind of get my feet wet about them. This was on the Merrymeeting brochure,
Oh, yeah.
and it has houses in it. But I was also painting where the houses were getting smaller and less a part of things. So that's really, I think, when it happened. I was segueing away from houses and into pure landscape. Yeah.
I mean, your beginning journal has the word house and everything.
I know.
And then you move a lot. I mean, of course, being an artist, you're telling all about your life, obviously, right? I love the way you, this is kind of backtracking, but where you had the film and then this red, the yarn. What made you think of that? I just thought that was great.
In the book?
Yes.
That book was such a departure for me, but it was very therapeutic.
Yeah.
I liked working that way. I'm an ideas person. In that book, I made the whole thing from all sorts of different materials that I wasn't used to using. And it just felt really playful, but also it was kind of going to something, like a deeper level. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very.
Yeah. So when I first started painting in acrylic, I was really trying to get my feet wet. So I was setting up little still lives of fruits and vegetables, little tiny, they're mat board cards. And no pressure, right? They're just simple little paintings. These were cherries in the windowsill. And I was looking at them at different times of day to see what the light was doing on them. Painted them both in the same day, actually. Very, very quick paintings. Trying to figure out how to mix acrylics and get some interesting neutrals.
Would you say it was on that board?
Yeah, it's on this mat board that I just happen to have.
Oh,
Yeah. And then something over here, I'll show you some more. I mean, I was really just setting something up and learning about acrylics that I never had been taught.
Is it an
Yeah.
Yeah, I love
So what did you find out about acrylics?
You have to layer. You have to really be patient and let it dry and layer.
And does the bottom layer show through? I mean,
Not necessarily.
yeah.
You also have to make sure that you get your halftones so that you have some sort of dimension because it does tend to read flat.
Right.
So, like I have lots and lots of color in this. Lots and lots of layers.
But each layer covers the one underneath it almost entirely. Mm.
And you can apply acrylic like a wash, almost like a watercolor, but then you build and build and build and turn your marks. Sweet potato. And I did lots of them. I paint a lot. A lot.
that. All day, all night.
A lot. During the pandemic, I was always at my easel at 8 a.m. Always.
Nice. 8 to what?
When my daughter was in high school, she had to do the last semester at home. She was class of 2020. So, not as much then. But because she was doing Zoom calls and things, I'd be in my studio and she'd be on her Zoom calls for high school. But now that she's in college, it's, I paint all the time. Yeah. When I'm not moving. Or teaching. This is a little place in Cushing, also on that kind of cardstock stuff. I painted on so many different surfaces, which I think is really fun.
Yes.
This felt kind of magical. It's this little hike you can go on in Cushing. Some drawings. I haven't really shown you that many drawings. This is how I draw. So some watery things. I'm really interested now in water. So this is graphite on
Oh.
drawing paper,
Okay.
just a pencil drawing.
And where were you drawing it?
So there are various botanic gardens. I've gone to the botanic gardens here, or there are a couple places that have really great flowers. In New Gloucester.
Oh.
So there's lots of different possible places that I've gone. Any questions? Any questions so far?
What do you eat for breakfast to get all this energy?
I love that.
When I go out painting, I always bring pistachios with me.
Uh-huh.
Like, always,
So that's the trick.
always, yeah. In fact, I brought some tonight too, yeah. Yeah. But I really love painting. I really love it. It just
Yeah.
takes me away from everything, and yet I'm learning, discovering stuff. I don't make my paintings the same way twice. I try and compose differently. I don't have like a game plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, yeah.
How has your teaching impacted your studio practice?
How has my teaching impacted it? I do a lot of demos now, and I try and figure out things for students. I have a lot of paintings that are like, this was a little still life that I set up for students, and then I'll end up painting it. I told them to get canvas board, so I thought, oh, I want to see how canvas board reacts. I haven't really painted on canvas board, so I did a little apple painting. So sometimes the teaching influences how I think about a new material, or if I'm asking students to get a certain type of paint, I'll buy that paint and just make sure that I can mix paint with it so that they're not frustrated, because there's nothing more frustrating than using, like, one person has one material and the other person has that, and then I haven't used that material at all. Because acrylic paints, depending on which type, they can feel creamy, they can blend differently. You can think you're talking about the same color, but with different types of paint, different brand makers. Alizarin Crimson with Winsor & Newton is going to feel differently than if somebody goes and buys golden acrylic. So I like to know what people are using so I can kind of help them and see if it's frustrating to paint on canvas board. You know, My preference is actually something smooth. Over the years, I've gone back and forth between masonite and canvas, and I love the slick surface of masonite. So I hadn't painted on canvas board for a long time, and I'm like, I don't really like this.
You find with smooth surfaces, whether it's masonite, that you can wipe things off differently? I mean, you know, when you want to eliminate, or it's different, I mean, right? Canvas, you have to scrape off, but you use a rag to
Yeah, I got really turned on to masonite when I was studying with this guy named George in between undergrad and grad school, and he would use, this is George, he's probably the one, so Martha introduced me to George. He taught at Mass College of Art, and he painted on masonite. Masonite gets really heavy if you paint too large. That's the drawback. So it will start to bow and become very, very heavy. So George painted on masonite, and he would scratch into it. So you can see on the side, he scratched. You can basically take the end of your paintbrush or your palette knife and scratch the title of the painting in it. And canvas won't allow you to do that.
How big is that piece there?
George tended to work pretty large, but I think these are more intimate self-portraits. He would paint himself every birthday.
That's a great idea.
You can see he scratched.
It's not going to improve.
So I studied with him after Smith, Martha introduced me to him, and I drove from Western Massachusetts to Mass College of Art twice a week, got there by 9 a.m. and painted until 5. I think I got up at 5 in the morning, and then got back at like in the evening, and then I had a job too. So I was working when I was,
Yeah, and children.
so I was in my 20s when I studied with him. So this is before graduate school. You can see how he scratched into the surface
Oh,
there.
can I see that?
So he took
Oh, yeah.
either the end of his paintbrush or a palette knife, and he would scrape in and write. George was fabulous. George had studied with Edwin Dickinson, and George would get up very, very
What
early.
was
in the morning.
George's last name?
Nick? George Nick?
Oh, yeah, he was kind of well known in that.
He's the real deal. He's amazing. He would get up at like 5 in the morning. He'd take his van out and paint landscape before class. And he had this van that had parking tickets on the front of it because maybe he'd gotten out of the vehicle for a minute in Boston area. It was sort of his badge of honor, like all these tickets. Landscape painter.
So that is acrylic and you just built up that texture on it?
He paints in oil,
Oil,
but on masonite.
okay,
And then he scratches with his palette knife or
okay.
tool. So he would, he paints all sorts of different subject matter. Old cars, planes, exteriors of shopping areas, all sorts of stuff. But he was definitely, he believed in this idea of simplify. And if you're squinting, you're simplifying the forms and you're getting it to its basic. He'd paint over and over and over. There's lots of layers on top. He's really sensitive to light and value and form. So. This is George again. I think he's in his 90s now.
Does he have a last name or is that his?
Nick, George Nick. George Bentley Nick.
Wow, look at that. Is that spelled N-I-C-K?
N-I-C-K, yeah. He's retired. He taught at Mass College of Art for a long time. People would go to study with him like I did. I got introduced kind of old style, like a guild. Like Martha made an introduction, asked George if I could study, and I wasn't technically affiliated with Mass Art. I just show up, and George would let me come in. And he didn't give compliments very often. So I overheard another student tell, afterwards, after he left for the day, we would keep working. And a student said to me, George gave you a compliment. He said, you're a real painter.
Wow.
And I was like, oh. So, yeah. He was very, it's great when you have a teacher that is a great role model for painting. So he was painting and showing and getting a lot of work done. So this sort of brings me to the flower series of work. We had a show at Merrymeeting. Every year there's a show. The first year that I was here, it was virtual because of COVID, and this past year we had a big show, lots of work. So definitely come and see student work. It's huge. The whole aisle, all wrapped all around. And I had some of my flower paintings, and I had some of my water paintings. So these are yet another surface that I embarked upon. I was curious to know what it would be like to paint on wood. I don't know what I was thinking.
It's a lot like masonite, isn't it?
It absorbs the gesso.
Oh.
So I painted and painted and painted, and then the more layers.
We have to shellac it.
I did, yeah. I typically put about 5 to 7 layers of gesso on my painting surface before I start to paint. And that seems like a lot, and sometimes I'll sand in between. But the more properly gessoed your surface is, the less paint you're going to use. And it will slip around in that way that I like it to. So this was an adventure. I painted, there's one more in this little conglomeration of flowers. I like to group paintings together. That's sort of been a trend in my work, is grouping things. So there's one more. I sent the one more to my friend who just had heart surgery. So she's doing okay. But these are all, they were all the same size, and they're on wood. And then just to shake it up, this one's on canvas. There are a lot of these 10 by 10 shows, so I started to think, oh, I should paint 10 by 10. So the next time one of those 10 by 10 shows comes up, I'm going to be ready. So I did a few. The giant stairs one is 10 by 10, and this one's 10 by 10. So. So during the pandemic, I also did a whole bunch of studies of people that I think about from painting. And this is a study that I did kind of for my daughter. She was interested in this painting. It's Camille Corot, who was a Barbizon painter, and he was the link between the Barbizon school and the Impressionists. So it's a painting that I was looking at all those oranges and neutrals, and it was a during COVID thing. I just did a number of different.
You did it of a print you saw. You didn't see an original Corot.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a Corot book. I have Corot in Italy. So if you don't know of his work, he did a lot of landscapes and just these ideas of looking through something that I'm interested in. So looking through to see something else. And I looked through the book, and I just loved his use of oranges and earthy tones, and I felt like I was getting away from that in my own work. So I literally looked at this painting, and I got some paint on the page. So I was trying to color match and draw it. I drew it freehand, but then I was looking at the water and how he interpreted the water and trying to learn more about that. It's a great idea if there's somebody whose work you like, to take the image and just not replicate it, but just look at some of the components in the work. So I wasn't trying to make an exact copy of this particular painting, but I was curious how he got these shifts in the rocks and how he got the reflections in the water. I'm teaching a class about water in the spring, and I've been trying to paint different types of water just to sort of think about when there's clear water versus when there's really deep ocean water, how it feels different. So when my students ask me questions, I can have answers. You can see that there's the reflection of the rock right here. So the value of the rock, and then the reflection here. A lot of colors, but I also was thinking about the transition. So when you're asking me about acrylic paint, what's getting those halftones, trying to get colors between.
But again, to press that point, with acrylic, you have to just lay in right off your palette. They don't mix at the edge. You don't do wet on wet.
Right.
Wet on wet doesn't work.
Right. So I was trying to figure out how to deal with that idea. Like, if my students are going to be using acrylic, so I don't want them to be frustrated trying to make a surface that they can't make. So it's a really fabulous idea if you like an artist. There's something about their brush strokes that you like, or their color palette. So I did a few of these. This one, and I did one for a friend that was a Frederick Church painting. Frederick Church actually came to Maine a few times, and it was a sunrise painting, and he turned his rocks so beautifully. There's a high contrast. Anytime you have a high contrast between colors, you're going to create space. And he does it on a dime. So I kept looking at this painting and thinking that I wanted to learn how he was doing it. So I made a very small Frederick Church painting and I gave it to my friend Lisa for her birthday, a little small one. So.
I have a sort of something that occurs to me, but I'm really sort of saying this. Have you ever been to the Museum of American Art in New Britain, Connecticut? It's terrific. Somebody told me about it. It's amazing. I'm curious because there are several Frederick churches there, and they have started in the 1800s. I mean, in the whole sort of span in about 5 different spaces. New Britain, I guess, had a lot of money at some point. Stanley Tools was there. At any rate, it's a terrific little museum with all of American landscape painting represented in exquisite rooms. Easy off on the way to New York.
Nice. What was it again?
The New Britain, I look it up. I don't know the official name. I think it's the New Britain Museum of American Art, but it's in New Britain, Connecticut, of all places.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice. It's great. When I have classes, I always tell my students, let us know about fun places that you've been.
Yeah, no, it's really, whenever I'm driving in New York, I try to make a stop there.
Yeah, it's great to see paintings in the original. I will never forget when I saw my first beer stats. Because when you see them in art history class, they're always the same size. And beer stats are huge. They fill a room. And you can just walk right into the painting. Yeah. I remember seeing them at Stanford Art Museum, very unexpectedly. They had a show of landscape painting, we went and saw it.
I saw, what is it, what's the museum in New York that moved up to a new setting? Not the Morgan, the Frick.
Oh,
Moved
yeah.
uptown, and so I went to see there, and I walked into and there was a Corot, like you said, and you know, 2/3 the size of that wall. I just stood there for 20 minutes. You know, I think I walked out, that was enough. You
Yeah.
know, it was sort of, you could really feel what he was doing as a painter. You could sort of, you're right, it's just not the same in a book.
Yeah.
So,
When I first started studying art history, I loved everything. And I felt like I had to go into a museum and look at everything. And I don't feel that way anymore. And I think I would go into a museum and, especially if it's a huge museum, and I'll say, I want to look at this, and this, and this, and that's enough. Because it's hard to take it all in. And to sort of allow yourself, like a museum, like going to the Met, you're not going to see, you can't just go through it. So, yeah, it's a great, anytime you can go see something in the original form, because there are always these unexpected things. You're surprised by the size of it, you're surprised by the palette, the brush strokes, just stuff that you can't see otherwise.
You can tell us about this one with the light, I love it. The blue one.
A little,
Oh, wow.
So this is that area of McCoy too. And it's that moment right before, kind of that time when things get illuminated right before it's going to be dusk. Like that golden hour, like a little past the golden hour, which during COVID, it was my daughter and I would go out for drives, and it was our favorite time to go out and look at the light. So this is a favorite spot, and I just loved how this part of the land is almost, it's a yellowy green. So that's really what this,
Where did you say that was?
this is Wharton Point.
Oh.
And then I was looking at reflections. This one feels a little different.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's done. I have some things that I've shown you, I'm not sure, but it has more of a calligraphic feel to the marks in it.
Are you selling your art? Is that right?
Not at the moment, I'm not, no. I mean, I am, it's funny because Catherine said, people are gonna ask you if you're selling your work.
Right.
Well, I think it's my next big step, yeah. Yeah, I've sold it, like I said, in the past, but I haven't sold any of the flower paintings. My idea for the flower paintings is
could you pass
actually...
them a quite one around?
Oh, sure.
Or can I see it, please?
What's your idea for the flowers?
So the flower paintings, I envision them to be all around you. So that they just completely surround you, sort of like a Monet's water lilies kind of feel, you know, where you're just enveloped by them. And I was maybe going to have you write down any area that you thought might be a great venue for them,
Oh,
because I have some thoughts about where to place them, but I didn't know if, why not ask? I know hospitals
oh, yeah.
would be maybe a beautiful thing to have them at a hospital. So I haven't shown them yet at all.
Midcoast Hospital has some beautiful art in their homes.
Yeah. So I have probably I have a few more, 2 of these.
The botanical gardens, we just
Oh.
had them.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
So this one was on. It was on some sort of Merrymeeting promotional.
Okay,
You know.
so,
This is
Actually, I don't know if
What did it
it's-
advertise? I don't remember, but it was on the, if you look at the Merrymeeting website, sometimes my work will be on it. So I have venues for the flowers, if you have any ideas about where I could show the flower paintings, and then places to paint. I've lived in Maine, I live in Portland, right, but I've lived in Mid-Coast, not that long, under 10 years. So if you know of any places to paint, let me know. I'm curious, I'm interested in watery, marshy sorts of places at the moment. So, I'm gonna leave these over here. We've got about 10 minutes, so if you have any questions for me,
Not
Is
really.
David okay?
if you have any questions, if you've taken a class with me, you know that I tend to go right up until the end. So, any things that you wanted to ask me about? You asked amazing questions about printmaking. I felt like that's something that people often wonder about, like what is a print, what does it look like, how does it get made?
Are you going to do any plein air, leading any groups out painting or having a group of painting?
Well, that'd be a good thing.
Yeah, so this summer, so when I worked at this museum in Wiscasset, I did 2 plein air painting workshops. And then this past summer, I did a plein air workshop at Mitchell Field. So we all met at Mitchell Field, and then people could either paint, work in color, draw. It ended up that I had some people that were doing watercolor, I had a few that were doing acrylic. Yeah, and basically just getting into the landscape and painting. It wasn't like an oil painting per se class or acrylic painting, but what you wanted to bring to it. So upcoming classes that I'm teaching, right now I'm doing a 10 by 10 class where I have 10 artists for 10 weeks, 10 projects. It's the 3rd time I've taught it, and it's really fun.
Oh, it is a lot of fun. And we did printmaking.
So I'll try and introduce people to artists that they maybe haven't heard about, techniques that maybe, we did Wolf Kahn where he did some oil pastels, did some printmaking like Gail was saying.
Gonna do sculpting tomorrow.
Tomorrow we're going to talk about Alberto Giacometti. So doing the 10 by 10 class, I teach drawing. I have 2 drawing classes that I'm offering right now. I teach a color class. I've taught color theory here, that's how I started. The painting at Mitchell Field this past year. I'll probably offer that again, actually. And sometimes I'll do classes like this summer I did flowers and leaves, where I set up a still life that was based on the sort of still life that a particular painter from art history would work from. So I talked about Henry Fantin Latour and his work, and I set up a Henry Fantin Latour-esque flower arrangement, and students painted that. And in that same class, we talked about Manet. It was a little 5-week class, shorter class. So those are some of the things that I've been offering. Printmaking comes up in January. And a class about water, artists inspired by water.
Will you bring your color theory background to the water course? I mean, it's inevitable that you would.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I never know what background people are gonna have when they come into the class. So I'll introduce something, and then if someone hasn't used a material or doesn't know color theory, I'll help them individually with it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Have you ever gone circular, oval?
Oh, I haven't, no. No, there are some painters from art history, like Parmigianino. He painted these rondelles. And even at the Victoria Mansion, there was the painters, Giuseppe Guidicini. They were the painters, the Italian set designer painters for the Victoria Mansion. They would paint these rondelles, trompe-l'oeil style. No. It's a very hard shape. A circle is very, very difficult because you have it's hard to make a space. It's a tricky shape. I haven't tried triangles either. But any kind of rectangle, square. Yeah.
Jennifer, I noticed there's no signature on this. Do you not sign your signature?
I don't. Isn't that?
Oh, wow.
I know, I know. I tend to sign the backs of my paintings in pencil. Here's my thought. I'm very funny about this. I don't want to lose any of the edges of my paintings, so that's why I strip frame them. I don't put paintings that cover up part of my piece. And then I've seen paintings in galleries where the person's signature will be in red at the bottom, and it's like, obviously it was that person, you know. I don't want my signature to interfere with the work.
I love that.
So, but I typically don't sign those.
I think it's great because I know what you're talking about when,
Yeah, I just go to all, you're supposed to buy the signature. You've got painting.
Yeah, that goes to my respect for, or not disrespect for, but the tradition in which you painted for a community. And you were, I mean, back to the monastic days where this was offered to your community. It was not about you.
Right.
It was about what's being offered.
Right, medieval artists did not sign work, and it was
Right.
collaborative and communal, and
Right,
yeah, yeah,
right. And
that's a good point, yeah.
very good.
I think the sort of the personal branding is a problem.
Yeah, I paint because I love it, like I love to paint. And in fact, when I teach, sometimes it's really hard for me to not like come and mix, like I want to mix color, like I love color. And so when students have color mixing, I love to help them with that because it's fun. And when I mix color, it's not always bright colors like I'm tending to paint. I like to mix neutrals and see what kinds of grays you can get. It's so different depending on what colors you start with. So yeah, I love color. I mean, it's kind of,
Yeah.
so,
Really?
yeah. Well, you asked amazing questions. Anything else?
I just want to say I enjoyed it so much, not to be on any technology, any tech. Really, it was so refreshing.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you for the generosity,
Yeah.
You're welcome.
spirit and enthusiasm.
you're welcome.
Isn't she amazing?
Yeah.
We like her a lot.
Yes, let me know.
Yeah, well, I'll be a little perfect.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Passionate, so passionate.
Yeah, we love.
Yeah, I realize I'm fascinated by light. That's why I love that last little one that you did. It was the only
Which
one.
one? What did you?
The light, the light, this one.
Mm.
The light. Yeah.
We have air conditioning.
Yeah, during
Oh, but her
COVID,
class is
I was
outside.
teaching myself.
It was just like, I
had
just went
5 books in
way to
48
the
days.
thrill,
And I
so
just
now I'm going
did
to
a
be
lot
doing
of
that.
artwork, see what I could learn from it.
Playwright.
That's not with her.
No, I'm just
That's
saying.
Katie.
Something
Yeah.
that maybe you're attracted to and you're not sure
But
why.
you know, I
You
was gonna
just love it for some reason.
Well, I knew I had an indeterminate amount of time, so I just started on page 1. All 5 of these books, although the person I couldn't get going, the gal who does the really big flowers. Like George O'Keeffe, that's who it was, I had a whole book of hers, and I never finished that book. I only tried a few, and they were horrible. My renditions were horrible.
You might
So,
try that for if you're looking for
anyways,
a shorter
But
class.
something like this would be lovely. There's a guy from out west,
Yeah.
I
Well, what
painted.
happened to me is
Scenes
you got
from
a
Gulf.
really sold many.
Yeah.
If you
What's
might
it called? Gulf of
remember,
Mexico,
I get so excited.
things that we
And
don't
then I
have
sign
here,
up for all these things, I
like
go, what?
windmills.
Because
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and there's
I mean, you
barns
could
and
only
stuff.
do
It's kind
so
of
many
interesting,
because
the
it
colors, the earth
lands
colors
on
out
the other
west.
class or the other
Right,
class.
yeah, that's hard to, it's
I've
hard
done it
to.
a few
Is this
times.
for your water class?
Just do one.
Yeah, I've just been
Yeah.
thinking a lot
So I got a
about
couple
different
of
types of
things
water
that-
lately.
Aren't you
Yeah.
the cheese making?
Because you've got marshy water,
No,
you've got
but I
ocean
kinda
water, you've got reflective water, you've got
We're
water
getting
that's
to
sort of
run,
coming and going.
Yeah,
Oh,
and it
nice.
changes. So she's working on that.
One of the things that painters will sometimes do is paint the water down.
That
So
fills up the
you make
surface,
a brush
right?
stroke going
Yeah.
down from the surface
So much fun.
instead of going
You get all
across,
the
and that will
different-
create
It's
space.
just, you know, like so many interesting than out. for so long because of COVID. It's
Yeah,
just
no
like-
adjustment.
You know, like this one goes with the way the water flows. I mean, if that's a bay,
Yeah, that's,
coming in and out.
I just love this spot. There's so much, this is to the right, that's to the
Oh,
left.
that's just great.
Yep, I love it.
And it is anxiety.
These two look like very different styles.
I have a few more that are like, more like,
This one.
yeah, they're this spot.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
this is a little more
The
realistic.
isolation.
An isolated.
Abstract shapes.
More accurate.
Oh,
I loved your house.
whenever that really
When you
changed
go like,
people.
in the lake.
Yeah, that's the place, that's the place in Cushing too. I made a couple of.
Oh, I just gonna live my life on it, whatever. Good people. I did too. Some of my friends are like freaking out. I would.
So we went completely analog when we did it.
That fine. I just sit on my own. It's just like,
My TV died on Friday. I've been having a great time.
You do what?
The TV died on Friday.
Oh.
My husband is, I think he's probably on the phone tonight trying to find you.
Whatever.
If I had to teach.
People at the restaurant.
Because I was a teacher and retired, fortunately, before there was too much computer stuff coming in.
I had some students that were coming in, some people that were having trouble getting their screens.
Now it's time to get back to reality. Start just
I'm
easing yourself
English
into
language
learning.
tutor.
Oh, yeah, I
And
know
when
why.
COVID hit, at one time we did it on Zoom.
I went all
Some of
that
mine
time
are
to
so
have
basic.
COVID, and then I just got it.
Computer skills.
So that,
We just
I'll just
didn't